We don't give jobs to homeless people here. This isn't a shelter. Please leave before I call someone." She said it without looking up fully from her monitor, the way you'd wave off a fly. She didn't ask my name. She didn't ask why a man in a worn army surplus jacket, 3-day stubble, and boots held together with duct tape was standing quietly in the marble lobby of Ashford Meridian Holdings at 8:14 in the morning. She had already decided everything about me in the 2 seconds it took me to walk through the door. My name is Elias Vance. In 11 minutes, I was scheduled to walk into the 40th floor boardroom of that same building and be introduced to the executive team as their new chief executive officer. What she did not know was that 5 years earlier, I had worked on the 9th floor of that exact tower in a compliance department that no longer exists under that name, and she has not realized that she was the reason I had been walked out of that building in handcuffs, live, in front of 91 coworkers for a crime I did not commit. She was about to find out, but so was I, because the part of this story I didn't know yet, standing in that lobby, was worse than anything I imagined on my way in that morning. Before Ashford Meridian, before any of it, I had a mother named Ruth who worked the overnight shift at a commercial laundry service, folding hospital linens until her hands cracked in winter. My father left before I was old enough to remember his face in anything but a single photograph, curling at the corners in a drawer. Ruth used to say, the difference between surviving and disappearing was whether you kept your word. She said it so often it stopped sounding like advice and started sounding like a rule of physics, as fixed and unchangeable as gravity. Keep your word even when it costs you, especially when it costs you. I was 12 when she got sick. Not the dramatic kind of sick that ends quickly, the slow kind. 2 years of hospital hallways, fluorescent lights humming overhead, me counting ceiling tiles in waiting rooms because counting was the only thing that kept my hands from shaking. She died 3 weeks after my 14th birthday. I went into the foster system that same month, bounced through 4 homes in 3 years, and learned the second rule that shaped my life just as much as my mother's first one. Nobody owes you anything, and the world will tell you exactly what it thinks you're worth the moment it stops needing anything from you. I worked my way through community college, washing dishes at a diner that no longer exists, then transferred to a state university on aid and loans, studying finance, because numbers, unlike people, do not lie to you if you learn to read them honestly. I graduated with debt that felt like a mountain, and a GPA that got me exactly 1 interview. An entry-level compliance analyst position at Ashford Meridian Holdings, a mid-sized investment firm with a reputation, at the time, for quietly promoting people who worked hard and kept their heads down. I was 26 years old when I walked into that building for the first time, wearing the only suit I owned, purchased second-hand and altered by a woman 2 blocks from my apartment who charged me half price when she found out I'd grown up in foster care, same as her nephew. I remember standing in that same marble lobby, looking up at the vaulted ceiling, thinking, this is the first place that's ever going to let me build something, instead of just surviving it. For 6 years, I did exactly that. By 32, I had been promoted twice, from analyst to senior compliance officer, overseeing the internal audit trail for a mid-sized portfolio division on the 9th floor. It was not glamorous work. It was careful work, reviewing trade logs, flagging irregularities, making sure the firm never drifted into the kind of gray areas that end careers and sometimes end companies. I was good at it. I was, by every performance review on file, one of the most meticulous people in that department. In my 6th year, a senior portfolio manager named Gregory Hale began routing a series of trades through client accounts that didn't match the risk profiles those clients had signed off on. Small deviations at first, the kind that could be explained away as rounding or timing. I flagged 3 of them internally, through the proper channel, exactly the way I was trained to. I documented everything. I kept copies. My mother's rule running underneath everything. Keep your word, even when it costs you. And for me, it cost me everything. Gregory Hale was well-connected, well-liked, and, as I would learn much later, quietly funneling a portion of those misrouted funds into accounts that eventually traced back to him personally. When the irregularities I'd flagged started drawing attention from a routine external audit 8 months later, Hale did something I did not see coming, because I was still naive enough at 32 to believe that documentation and honesty were enough to protect you.
He got there first. He restructured the narrative before I even knew there was a narrative to restructure. He told the audit committee that it was I who had been altering the trade logs, that my flags were a cover story planted after the fact to protect myself once I realized the irregularities might surface. He had months to prepare that story. I had one meeting to hear it read back to me as though it were already fact. The firm's internal investigation lasted 11 days. I was suspended on day 1, escorted from the building by 2 members of building security while 91 of my coworkers watched from their desks, some looking away, most just watching, the way people watch anything that isn't happening to them. I remember the specific weight of that walk, past every desk on the 9th floor, my name badge already deactivated in my pocket, a banker's box of my belongings in my arms. On day 9, a young front desk receptionist named Marla Denning was interviewed as part of the investigation. She had, months earlier, seen me staying late several nights reviewing files at my desk, alone, after most of the floor had emptied. She had also, on one occasion, seen me copying a stack of trade confirmations at the small copier near her desk, the copier I used because the one on my own floor was broken that week. She told the investigators honestly, as far as she understood it, that she'd seen me working alone with sensitive documents outside of normal hours on multiple occasions, and that it had struck her as unusual at the time. She was not lying. She believed every word of what she said. She had no idea those late nights were me building the very case that proved Gregory Hale's guilt, or that the documents I was copying were the evidence trail I was preparing to hand to compliance leadership the following week before Hale moved first. Her testimony, small and honest and completely misunderstood, became one of the central pieces of circumstantial evidence used to justify my termination. Not because she wanted to hurt me, because she believed sincerely that she was doing the right thing by telling the truth about what she'd seen. I was terminated for cause. My reputation in the industry, in a city where reputations move at the speed of a phone call, was finished before I'd even cleared out my desk. It took federal investigators 14 more months to unravel what Gregory Hale actually did, by which point he had already resigned quietly with a severance package and moved to a firm 2 states away that never asked the right questions. My name was never formally cleared in any public way that mattered. The damage had already been done in the version of the story everyone remembered, which was the first version, the fast one, the one that got told before the truth had time to catch up. I was 32 years old, and in the span of 11 days, I lost my career, my reputation, and my apartment 4 months later when the debt caught up to me faster than any new job offer could. I want to be honest about what those years actually looked like, because I think people who haven't lived them build a picture in their heads that is either too tragic or too tidy, and the truth is neither. For the first 8 months, I stayed with a cousin 2 states away, sleeping on a pull-out couch, sending out resumes that either went unanswered or were quietly declined the moment a background check surfaced the termination. Nobody ever said the real reason out loud. I watched the hiring manager's expression change in real time during 3 separate interviews, the exact moment they hit that line on the report. After 8 months, the cousin's situation changed. A new baby, a smaller apartment, and I understood without being told that it was time to go. I spent the next 4 years moving between shelters, a converted church basement in the winters, sometimes a tent behind a hardware store that let me use the outdoor spigot if I helped unload deliveries before sunrise. I learned things in those years that no business degree ever taught me. I learned exactly how invisible a person can become in a city of 8 million people. I learned which coffee shops would let you sit for 4 hours if you bought 1 drink and kept your head down. I learned that dignity, the way my mother talked about it, is not a feeling other people give you. It is something you protect internally, alone,
when nobody else is protecting it for you. I also, during those years, never stopped documenting. I kept a small waterproof folder, the kind fishermen use, with copies of everything I had preserved from the Hale investigation, because some stubborn part of me, the part that still believed in my mother's rule about keeping your word, refused to let the story end on someone else's lie. There was a man at that same shelter named Desmond Price, older than me by maybe 15 years, who had once run his own small logistics company before a divorce and a back injury took it apart piece by piece. Desmond was the one who taught me the actual mechanics of surviving long term, not the version people imagine from the outside. He taught me which precinct's officers would leave you alone if you kept your area clean, which church on the east side served a hot breakfast without a sermon attached, and, more than anything, he taught me to keep moving towards something, anything, even if it was small. A man who stops reaching for something, he told me once, sitting on an overturned crate behind the hardware store, starts disappearing whether his body's still standing there or not. He said it the way my mother used to talk about keeping your word, like it was a law of physics rather than a piece of advice. Desmond never got his own second chance. He passed in my 4th year there, quietly, in his sleep, in a cot 2 down from mine, and the shelter director let me keep his old flashlight, the one he used to read secondhand paperbacks by after lights out. I still have it. There was also a woman named Yolanda Briggs who ran the overnight desk at the shelter, and who, unlike almost everyone else in the system, remembered small details about people unprompted, the way you'd remember them about a friend rather than a case number. She remembered that I flinched at raised voices near the intake door, a habit left over from the day I was walked out of Ashford Meridian, though I never once told her why. She never asked me to explain it. She just started seating me farther from the door during check-in without comment. The kind of quiet accommodation that costs a person nothing and means almost everything to the person receiving it. I think about Yolanda more than almost anyone else from those years, because she never once asked what had happened to me before she decided I was worth a small kindness. She simply extended it the same way you'd extend it to anyone, because extending it cost her nothing, and she'd never been taught that some people needed to earn it first. In year 3, a woman named Patricia Alvarez, a public defender who ran a legal aid clinic out of a folding table in that same shelter basement twice a month, looked through that folder on a slow Tuesday because I asked her to, more out of habit than hope. I remember she read through it twice, slowly, without saying anything, and then looked up at me and asked one question nobody else had bothered to ask in 3 years. Who else knew you were working late those nights? That single question was the beginning of everything that came after. Her willingness to ask what else this could mean instead of accepting the fastest version of my story the way everyone else had. She spent 4 months of her own unpaid time helping me file a formal request to reopen the case with the same regulatory body that had investigated Hale years earlier, this time with the full documentation I had protected, plus 14 months of federal findings against Hale that had never been cross-referenced with my termination file. Patricia worked out of a folding table 2 nights a week between eviction cases and custody hearings, cases that paid her nothing and cost her sleep. It took 2 more years. Regulatory bodies move the way glaciers move. But in year 5, a formal finding was issued, quietly, without press coverage, stating that my termination had been based on materially incomplete evidence and that the circumstantial testimony used against me had been misapplied outside its proper context. It was not a dramatic vindication. It was a paragraph in a file, released to almost no fanfare, 5 years too late, to save the apartment, the reputation, or the version of my life that existed before any of this happened. But it was enough, because a board member at a private holding company, a woman named Corinne O'Coffer, who had read that finding as part of unrelated due diligence work, tracked me down through the shelter network of all places and asked to meet with me. She told me her firm had recently acquired a controlling stake in Ashford Meridian Holdings, the same company, restructured twice over in the years since, and that the incoming board was looking for someone to lead a complete cultural and compliance overhaul. Someone who understood from the inside exactly what happens when an institution protects a comfortable story instead of an uncomfortable truth. She offered me the position of Chief Executive Officer. I told her I needed 48 hours to think about it. I spent most of that time walking, just thinking about many things, even about my former coworkers who had watched me walk out in handcuffs and never once in 5 years sent so much as an email. I accepted, and I made one decision on my own without telling Corinne or the board about how I wanted my first day to go. I want to explain this clearly because I know how it sounds, and I've thought about it enough times since to know exactly why I did it. I did not walk into Ashford Meridian Holdings on my first day dressed the way I was because I wanted to trick anyone or catch anyone or perform some kind of lesson for an audience. I walked in wearing the same jacket I'd worn through my last winter in that shelter basement, boots I hadn't yet replaced, 3 days without a proper shave. Because that morning, standing in front of a mirror in the small apartment the company had already arranged for me, I looked at the two versions of myself, the polished new CEO in a car service and a tailored suit, and the man who had spent 5 years learning exactly how the world treats someone with nothing, and I realized I needed, for myself, one last morning to walk through that door exactly as I actually was, before I ever let that building see me as anything else. I told Corinne only that I wanted to arrive quietly, alone, ahead of the formal introduction scheduled at 8:30, and that I preferred no announcement to lobby or building staff. She agreed, assuming reasonably that I simply wanted privacy before a high-pressure morning. I did not tell her, because I did not fully understand it myself yet, that some part of me needed to know whether the building that broke me 5 years ago had changed even slightly on the most basic human level in the years since. Whether kindness there had ever been a policy, or whether it had only ever been a performance for people who looked like they mattered. I walked in at 8:14, in that jacket, those boots, carrying nothing but the same waterproof folder I'd carried through 5 years of shelters, and I stood in the marble lobby I remembered so clearly, looking up at the same vaulted ceiling I'd once thought meant I was finally building something instead of surviving it. That is when Marla Denning, still working the front desk after all these years, looked up from her monitor and told me they don't give jobs to homeless people here. I did not recognize her voice at first. 5 years changes a voice slightly, the way it changes everything else. But something in her cadence, in the specific way she clipped her sentences short, sat at the edge of my memory the moment she spoke again. "Sir, I need you to leave. This isn't a shelter, and we don't have anything for you here. There's a service 2 blocks east that can help you. I'm not looking for a shelter. I have a meeting." She looked at me properly for the first time, taking in the jacket, the boots, the folder under my arm, and her expression did the thing I had seen so many times over 5 years, a flicker of something almost like embarrassment for me, immediately smoothed over into brisk, practiced patience, the tone people use with someone they've decided needs to be handled rather than heard. "I understand it might feel that way," she said, gentler now, but no less certain. "But I need you to understand, this is a private corporate building. We don't have open positions posted at the front desk. And even if we did, you'd need to apply online like everyone else. I really am trying to help you here. I have an appointment at 8:30 with the board." She almost laughed. Not cruelly, I understood later, but with the specific disbelief of someone who has simply never had a reason to imagine the sentence I'd just said could be true. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step outside. I don't want to have to call building security, but I will if I need to." I told her my name, Elias Vance. Something moved behind her eyes. Not recognition exactly, more like a name surfacing from very deep water, familiar in a way she couldn't immediately place. I'm sure she had processed thousands of names across the front desk in 5 years. Mine had been one line in an investigation file she'd forgotten the moment it stopped being relevant to her own life. I'm going to call security now, she said, reaching for the phone, her earlier gentleness hardening into something more defensive, the posture of someone who felt she'd already been more than patient with a situation she didn't understand. That is when Karine Okafor stepped out of the elevator behind me, 12 minutes early for our scheduled introduction, and said, clearly across the lobby, "Mr. Vance, we're ready for you upstairs whenever you are." Marla's hand stopped on the phone receiver. Let me walk you through what happened over the next several minutes carefully, because this is the part of the story that surprised even me standing in the middle of it. Marla's face did the thing I described in an earlier part of this story that I've told before. The color draining, the posture breaking, the specific physical collapse of someone realizing all at once the size of the mistake they've just made. She stood up from her desk too fast, her chair rolling back and hitting the wall behind her. "Mr. Vance, I am so sorry. I had no idea. If I had known who you were, I never would have." "That's not actually the problem," I said. I said quietly, because by that point in my life, after 5 years on the street, I had lost almost all capacity for the kind of anger that used to live in me at 32.
The problem was never that you didn't know who I was. The problem is that you needed to know who I was before you were willing to treat me like I mattered. But that is not where this story ends. And I need to tell you the part that changed everything, the part I did not see coming even though it happened to me directly. Corinne, standing beside me, glanced at the nameplate on Marla's desk, then back at me, something shifting in her expression. "Marla Denning," she said slowly. "Elias, is that—" I looked at Marla properly for the first time since I'd walked in, past the 5 years, past the different haircut and the small lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before, and the recognition finally landed like water finds its level, all at once, complete. She was the receptionist who had told investigators 5 years earlier that she'd seen me working alone with sensitive files after hours. The testimony that had helped end my career. She did not recognize me the same way because to her I had been one name in one interview, given honestly, in good faith, about something she genuinely believed mattered. She had no memory of my face because in her mind she had never actually met me. She had only ever answered a question about a man she'd occasionally seen photocopying papers after 6 o'clock. I watched her realize it in real time, the exact moment Corinne said my full name a second time, and something in Marla's memory finally connected 5 years of distance. Her hand went to her mouth, not from fear of losing her job this time, from something worse, I think. The specific horror of understanding that she had now hurt the same person twice, 5 years apart, both times while sincerely believing she was doing something reasonable, even good. "Oh my God," she said. "You're the compliance officer from the Hale investigation." I did not say anything for a moment. I let that sit in the lobby, the way I have learned to let hard things sit, without rushing to fill the silence with reassurance neither of us had earned yet. "I told the truth," she said, quieter now, almost to herself. "I told them the truth about what I saw. I didn't know what it would be used for. I didn't know that it would—" She stopped. "I've thought about that investigation for the past 5 years. I never knew what happened to you afterward. I told myself it probably worked out fine, because thinking about it any other way was too hard to carry. Marla Denning did not lie 5 years ago. She did not lie this morning either. Both times, she told the truth as she understood it, in good faith, believing she was doing the responsible thing. Both times, that truth, filtered through incomplete context and an institution eager for a fast, comfortable story, caused real harm to the same person. That is a harder thing to reckon with than simple cruelty would have been. If she had been malicious, if she had lied on purpose either time, this would be a simpler story, the kind where the villain gets what she deserves and everyone moves on, feeling clean about it. But that is not what actually happened, and I think pretending otherwise would dishonor what I actually learned during those 5 years on the street. The real injustice was never really about Marla Denning as a person. It was about a system, an institution, a culture that consistently rewarded the fastest, most convenient version of a story
over the slower, harder work of asking a second question. 5 years ago, nobody at that company asked Marla a single follow-up question about what she'd actually seen, or whether it could mean anything other than exactly what it looked like on the surface. This morning, she didn't ask me a single question either, before deciding what my presence in that lobby meant. The pattern was not her cruelty. The pattern was an institution's comfort with snap judgments, dressed up as diligence the first time, dressed up as caution the second time, both times protecting the story that required the least effort to believe. I did not fire Marla Denning that morning, and I want to explain why, because I know it might not be the ending people expect. I asked her, once Corinne had stepped aside to give us a moment, whether she remembered anything else from that investigation 5 years ago, anything she'd been asked or hadn't been asked, anything that had stayed with her. She told me, honestly, that the investigators had spent 4 minutes with her total 5 years ago. 4 minutes to gather testimony that helped end a man's career. Nobody had ever asked her a follow-up question either in all the years since about whether that 4-minute conversation still weighed on her. I told her I believed she had told the truth both times, and that the truth alone was never actually the problem. I told her the problem was a company that never taught anyone at any level to ask a second question before deciding what a first impression meant. Over my first 90 days as CEO, I did not conduct the kind of dramatic public reckoning some people might expect from a story like this. I did something slower, and I think, ultimately, more honest. I commissioned a full review not of any single employee's conduct, but of the company's actual practices, how quickly the firm historically moved from suspicion to termination, how rarely anyone at any level was trained or encouraged to ask a clarifying question before treating an assumption as settled fact. What that review found was not really about Marla, and it was not really about Gregory Hale either, though his name came up more than once as the review widened. It found a pattern spanning back over a decade of the institution consistently rewarding speed and certainty over patience and inquiry at every level, from the front desk to the boardroom. Marla Denning had never been the exception. She had simply been standing at the specific intersection where that pattern touched my life, twice, 5 years apart. I moved her, at her own request once she understood the broader findings, into a newly created role focused on employee onboarding and internal communication, a position built specifically around teaching new hires at every level of the company the habit of asking one more question before deciding what something means. She has held that role for 2 years now, and by every account I've received since, she has been exceptional at it, in the specific and hard-won way that only someone who has personally lived the cost of not asking that question can be. I want to close one more loop, because I think it matters, and because it's the part of this story that surprised the regulatory body more than anyone. 2 years into my role as CEO, the internal review I'd commissioned surfaced a detail the original federal investigation had missed 7 years earlier. A secondary account, structured through a subsidiary Hale had used briefly before moving firms, that had never been fully cross-referenced against the original findings. I turned that detail over to the same regulatory body that had cleared my name 5 years after my termination, not out of any personal vendetta, but some rule was still the only rule I had ever fully trusted. Keep your word, even when it costs you something. It took 14 months. Gregory Hale, comfortable for a decade in a career built on a story that was never fully true, was formally sanctioned and barred from the industry, the finding this time covered by exactly the kind of press attention my own vindication never received. I did not attend any hearing. I did not issue any public statement about it. I simply informed Patricia Alvarez, the public defender who had spent 4 unpaid months helping me file my original case from a folding table in a shelter basement, because I thought she, more than almost anyone, deserved to know the rest of the story actually closed the way it should have the first time. Ashford Meridian Holdings looks different now, though not in the ways you might expect from the outside. The marble lobby is the same. The vaulted ceiling is the same. What changed is smaller and harder to photograph. Every new employee, regardless of position, goes through a training session in their first week built around a single question. What else could this mean? Not as a slogan on a poster, but as an actual practiced habit reinforced in performance reviews, in hiring decisions, in the quiet daily moments where an institution either asks a second question or doesn't. One of the clearest examples of what actually changed came about 8 months into the new program, involving a junior analyst named Theo Whitmore, 24 years old, in his first year out of college. Theo had been flagged by a floor manager for reviewing archived client files after hours, alone, 3 nights in a row, the exact circumstantial shape of what had once ended my own career 8 years earlier. The floor manager, new to the company and unfamiliar with the specifics of my history, brought the concern directly to Marla, now overseeing onboarding and internal culture, rather than escalating it straight to HR the way it once would have moved automatically. Marla did the thing she had spent 2 years training herself and everyone else to do. She asked Theo directly what he'd been working on. It turned out he'd discovered a minor but real discrepancy in a legacy account, something that had gone unnoticed for years, and he'd been quietly building the documentation to bring to compliance the following week, nervous about raising it too early without proof, worried nobody would believe a first-year analyst over an established department. He was, in almost every detail that mattered, retracing the exact steps I had taken at 32, and this time someone asked the second question before a single accusation was ever made. Theo's finding turned out to be legitimate, a small clerical error rather than anything malicious, but the process itself, the asking rather than assuming, was the entire point. I still walk through that lobby most mornings the same way, dressed simply, no entourage, no announcement. Marla greets me now by name, the way she greets everyone who walks through that door, taking the 2 extra seconds to actually look at whoever is standing in front of her before deciding anything about who they are or what they need. She keeps a small, handwritten note taped inside her desk drawer, one I only found out about by accident during a facilities walkthrough. It reads, in her own handwriting, "What else could this mean?" I never asked her to write it. She told me she wrote it herself the week after our conversation in the lobby, because she needed to see it every single day in her own hand to make sure she never again mistook the fastest version of the story for the whole of it. Some mornings, I think about the version of me that stood in that lobby 8 years ago, thinking this was the first place that would ever let him build something instead of just surviving it. I think about the 5 years after that, when survival was the only thing left to build. And I think about how strange it is that the truth, delayed as long as it was, eventually found its way back to exactly where it needed to go, not through anger, but through the same stubborn, unglamorous habit my mother taught me at a kitchen table decades before any of this happened. Keep your word, even when it costs you, and trust that eventually it will cost you less than staying silent would have. I've thought a great deal about why this story feels different to people than the ones where the villain is simply cruel and gets what's coming to them cleanly. I think it's because most of us are not actually the Gregory Hales of the world, the ones who lie on purpose and know exactly what they're doing. Most of us are closer to Marla, standing at a front desk or wherever our own version of that desk happens to be, believing sincerely that we're seeing the whole picture, when we've really only seen the fastest, most convenient version of it. The real question this story leaves me with isn't whether you'd recognize a billionaire or a CEO standing in front of you in the wrong jacket. It's whether you'd ask a second question before deciding you already understood someone completely, especially when the first version of the story was the easiest one to believe. So here's what I'd ask you. Think of the last time you were completely certain about someone, based on almost nothing at all. Would one more question have changed anything? I'd genuinely like to know. Drop your honest answer in the comments. Thanks for watching. This story was made and produced by Akavox, and don't forget to like and subscribe.